Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. I have been on a bit of a hiatus guys, so I apologize for not putting out more content for you guys, but I've been a little bit held up with work responsibilities in the past, but now I'm done, so I am back and I'll be putting a whole lot more FFTCG content out for you guys and getting really involved and letting you guys know what's happening with the game. So, to ease us back into videos, today I'll be talking about some of the latest news in regards to the European Championships for 2018. So recently there was an announcement made, and this was actually quite a surprise for a lot of players and has had a lot of players debating and discussing this topic. So the discussion that everyone is having is in regards to the format of the event. So recently, Square Enix have announced that this tournament, the European Championships, will be using a two-deck format. So this format is very similar to the format that was used for the World Championships last year. So each player will be bringing in two 50-card decks, and each of these decks have their normal deck building restrictions. However, on top of this, players can only use a maximum of any free cards between their two decks collectively. So an example of this would be you cannot use, say, 3 copies of Layla in both your decks, because that would be 6 copies in total. But you can use, say, 2 copies of Nidhogg in deck A and a single copy of Nidhogg in deck B, because collectively there will be 3 copies in total amongst your two decks. As we're playing the games, because both players are bringing in two decks for this tournament, all the games from Swiss up to the finals will be played using best of 3 format. So both players will have the choice of what deck they want to play in their game 1. Then subsequently in game 2, they will be playing with their other deck. And then if the result is tied at 1-1, then game 3 will be played with the decks that both players have lost with in the previous rounds. So obviously this does bring some very interesting extra strategies to the game, extra considerations for deck building, and even deck selection. And yeah, these are actually pretty interesting considerations, and you can really go deep into these sort of strategies. So I'll be making another video later this week where we really sort of discuss and break down some of the interesting strategies and interesting considerations that players can take into to give them a little bit more of an edge when it comes to this format. But why are players talking about this matter? So this announcement was actually made a couple of days ago, and the European Championships are actually going to be held on the 20th and the 21st of October. And considering that today is the 1st of October, this effectively has given players more or less 3 weeks to prepare for this event, or 3 weeks to let them know that there's a change in the standard format for this event. So why are players sort of upset, or why are they discussing, or like why are they deliberating in regards to this announcement? I've read through the threads, and it seems like the 3 general points that players have is firstly in regards to the short notice of this announcement. Secondly, in regards to non-uniformity of the format compared to other regions. So no other regions, including ANZ, North America, Asia, and Japan, have had a similar format tournament as a part of their World Championships qualifier. So there's a little bit of non-uniformity there. And players are a little bit upset that they get like a very different tournament format, or a slightly different tournament format than other regions are. And thirdly, people are starting to question how important is competitiveness or competitive integrity as compared to other aspects of the game, such as player enjoyment, viewer enjoyment, and diversity of decks. And yeah, these sort of considerations. How important is pure competitiveness and true competition compared to these other aspects of the game and the viewership and the experience overall, as well as some other sort of like more minor sort of discussion topics, such as being able to source additional cards or source an additional deck for the event, and yeah, the longevity of the game in general, considering how the game is being managed and operated at this time. So first of all, let's break it down into like each of these 3 main queries. So the first one is regarding the short notice of this announcement. So 3 weeks is definitely not a long time to test additional decks, and especially considering that this is a 2-deck format, there are additional considerations that you can bring into like how you select your decks, whether you're going to target a specific deck that you want to sort of beat out, or whether you're going to select 2 decks that are going to sort of balance each other out, cover each other's weaknesses, and then like a lot more into that. So there's a lot of strategies, even amongst the deck selection itself, that can really sort of swing games and matchups. But yeah, that being said though, 3 weeks is not too short a time. It is a short period of time, but we have had many tournaments in the past where players have had effectively this much time to prepare for a tournament. So there have been previously Crystal Cups, I believe, as well as definitely one of the ANZ Grand Open tournaments where the tournaments did occur 2 weeks after a set release. And since a set only becomes legal for competitive play 2 weeks after the set releases, this is effectively the shortest amount of time from when the set releases that these cards will be available for competitive play. So there have been situations and there have been times where players have been able to put together decks, build decks, test and prepare for a tournament under short notice. So I think definitely 3 weeks is not an unreasonable amount of time to build their decks. That being said, though, there are different sorts of players, and they do have greater strengths and weaknesses when it comes to any sort of deck building format. So there are certainly players who want to go deep and really learn a specific deck and their matchups and learn how they're going to counter every specific matchup, how they're going to play against them, and little metagame text like that. These sort of players generally require longer time, or they would like to have longer time to really sort of test out, learn, and sort of practice each matchup. Then there are those players who are much better at sort of theory crafting, building decks and experimenting quickly and sort of putting something together early. And these are the players that generally have a very solid deck built, even though it may not be perfected, but they generally have something very workable very quickly in the format. And these are players that generally tend to like having shorter periods of time. So definitely in regards to 3 weeks, that's definitely not enough time for players to like fully figure out the format, to fully understand the format, and to sort of fully test out all the decks available to them. That being said, though, I think that this is a really good test for players. So it really is. So in a situation where players have had like say 3 months to fully test out and understand the format, which effectively by this tournament will be the case, the set will effectively have been out for about 3 months when the European Championships occur. So players generally already have a pretty good feel for the format and what decks they can bring into this tournament. That being said, though, because this does switch up the format a little bit, or does affect the format a little bit, those players who are able to adapt and learn and theory cast and strategize about this will have a bit more of an advantage. And I think that this is a great little component to tournaments that really sort of helps a particular sort of player and really gives each player the ability to play to their strengths, whether it's being able to deck build early or being able to perfect their decks and so on. So I think those who are able to adapt more quickly will have a little bit more of an advantage here. And I think allowing that player strength to sort of at least shine this late into a particular Opus format is good. In addition to this, because the format is actually quite fresh, and I don't believe players will have like fully tested out how to play these best of 3 formats particularly well by then, it does give players who are able to adapt and have flexibility and to really learn quickly upon the day, it gives them a little bit more advantage of sort of figuring out on the day how to best handle these sort of matchups and being able to think flexibly and on their feet. So definitely I think that this format does help them as well. And it really tests not only the player's ability to prepare for a tournament, but also their ability to adapt and play well on the day. And so this is another consideration for sort of like competitive card games. I don't think that gets tested often enough, especially in FFTCG, where they don't really have multiple formats and they don't really have like a sealed or limited format as well. So I think this adjustment does sort of even up the playing field and does allow players of different sort of strengths and weaknesses to sort of like shine in this event. So sort of following on in regards to this, 3 weeks is not a huge amount of time. So one of the considerations in regards to the short noticeness of this announcement is that players will may struggle with sourcing the cards for their secondary deck. So usually, players will have like the 50 cards they need for their main deck, but such a short-term announcement does put a little bit of strain on players who have sort of like expected to only use one deck to source the 50 extra cards that they need for their secondary deck. While Final Fantasy TCG definitely is a pretty cheap game to play, and unlike say other card games, say Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic Gathering, we're not really dealing with singles that are in the like $20, $30, $40, $60, $80 range. It does bring a little bit of a short-term financial burden for people who may not be as financially set up as others. So definitely if you are in like more of a student situation and you're not working, definitely this is much more of a financial burden for you compared to someone who might be working full time. And so yeah, so like definitely that is a consideration as well. But definitely it's one of the more manageable games for this to occur in. And yeah, and finally overall, even though this is a short-term announcement and players may feel that they're under pressure, it is the equivalent pressure for everyone. It's not like anyone got to sort of practice this format before anyone else. It's not like anyone knew about this announcement before anyone else. So everyone's effectively on an even playing ground, even though this is a bit of a short-term announcement. So moving on to the second concern that players have had is in regards to non-uniformity of the format compared to other regions. So out of the major regions that are like playing these World Championship qualifying events, such as North America, ANZ, Asia, and Japan, Europe is the only region to have a tournament where players qualify for World Championships that is quite different to the format of all the other regions. And this is a bit of a concern for players who do feel that this difference in formats does give them some differences, or it's a little bit unfair compared to other regions how they get a different format to the format that other regions or every other region is playing. So some players may feel that this is a little bit unfair, and it's a bit of a shock in regards to like the format that they'll be playing in. That being said, though, if we look at it from like more of a like logistical standpoint, each region is very different. And so obviously Europe is probably one of the most complex regions to run organized play in, simply because that there are multiple countries involved, and I assume that there are sort of multiple distributors within the system. So as a result, there's a lot more financial and logistical intricacies that this region has to deal with compared to, say, North America, which effectively all you're dealing with is, say, Canada and North America. It's just like one very large region. So yeah, logistically, it's a lot easier to create a uniform system there as opposed to a more uniform system in Europe. It might be a little bit more difficult to do. So yeah, so taking into these considerations, it's not unrealistic for Europe to have a slightly different format compared to North America. And definitely this is something that as the game matures or as organized play gets a little bit more experience, that this is definitely something that we can sort of shift away from, where regions can be a little bit more uniform and the formats can be much more similar, and there could be a much more similar qualification format for all the different regions that are involved with FFTCG. So I think that people are sort of like judging the organized play a little bit too early. They are compared to Magic the Gathering, who has had like 25 years to really sort of perfect and build up the organized play and their World Championships and premier event structures. So definitely, I feel that players are expecting a little bit too much uniformity for a game that's actually quite early. And yeah, and I think that's definitely something that players are being a little bit harsh on. Definitely, I do agree that if a company is developing a system, players and the community should get involved and try to give them their feedback and let the company know about their thoughts and pros and cons in regards to this format. But that being said, though, yeah, I think this game is doing pretty well so far. So in regards to the organized play philosophies for Square Enix and Final Fantasy TCG, I did get the opportunity to have a pretty in-depth discussion with some of the Square Enix executives, as well as Kageyama and a lot of people involved with FFTCG while I was at World Championships last year. And I did get to pick their minds quite a little bit about sort of how they manage and operate and run the game, and sort of where they want to sort of take the game, right? So like, they do have a plan, and they are experimenting, and they do take into consideration a lot of the feedback that players do bring forward. Obviously, certain more competitive players, they would prefer or opt into more of a like uniform, streamlined competitive system that, say, Magic the Gathering has. But that being said, though, it's not always a great business strategy to always just copy what the market leader in an industry does. So Final Fantasy TCG is a great game. It's really well balanced, and a lot of people enjoy it because it has a similar structure to Magic the Gathering, which is a pretty good structure, but it does work out a lot of the issues, such as the mana system, the resource system, that does make the game a lot more free-flowing, flexible, and less likely to be out variance in luck. And I think that that's how Square Enix should approach the organized play. Magic the Gathering is a pretty good model for how organized play should be run, but tweaking upon that, taking the parts that are good and then tweaking upon it and adding their own individual solutions to the individual problems, and making it more usable or more relevant to their particular game structure, game format, and their community, I think that's the way to go. So right now, Square Enix is definitely going kind of like too far in the opposite direction, where they are trying to build everything from the ground up and trying to like develop their own structure and style. But I think that they can, to a certain degree, take upon some of the lessons learned from other games and implement a little bit more of these structures into their own system, and sort of like create a interesting hybrid that's improved upon the existing system that is specific to the FFTCG community. So finally, the third concern that players have is that how important is competitiveness or competitive integrity, or how important is like competition as a focus compared to other factors of the game, such as deck diversity, player experience, the viewer experience, and so on. These sort of like more qualitative experiences that players have in regard to game versus having a very uniform competitive system where it's all very much technical and very competitive. And very competitive and focused on competition, right? So how important are all these? How important is the competition factor compared to all these other factors? And so I think, again, a lot of players who do well at this game also have a bit of a Magic the Gathering background, or have like a bit of a background in other like competitive card games. And I think that they are sort of they are unfairly comparing the existing OP systems for very established games to FFTCG, right? So and I think that this is an unfair comparison because for example, in Magic the Gathering, there's already very large, well-established player base for the game. There are different sort of demographics, and because of these different sort of demographics and different sort of players, Magic the Gathering or Wizards of the Coast are able to develop different marketing strategies and different play programs to sort of to appeal to each one of these players, right? There are more casual formats that allow sort of more beginner-friendly type events, such as like game day and these sort of events to sort of help drive players in. More casual events like Friday Night Magic, as well as like sealed limited formats, as well as their ability to run larger Grand Prix and Pro Tour style tournaments. And yeah, each one of these events targets and caters to a very specific type of player within their audience. Now, they're able to do this because there's so many players within their game that it is fiscally and economically viable for them to like create programs in each one of these type of demographics that all serve them better, because there's a large enough player base within each one of these types of players to justify that, right? But you really do have to consider that FFTCG is actually quite a small game, and it's not nearly as large as any of the established big three, which is Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, or Pokemon. These have large player bases, very well marketed, and because of that, each one of those types of players, it is very possible for the producer of the games to market to them and to cater to them individually. Now, that being said, FFTCG is not at that stage, so the competitive tournament circuit does play multiple uses within their whole marketing system. So definitely, when it comes to tournament viewership, there are a lot of different player categories that they can use this tournament to sort of market to, right? So not only are they sort of appealing to the competitive player by showing these high-level games where players are playing their decks very optimally, very well tuned, and playing these very high-level decks. But ideally, they want to sort of create interest for the more casual or more upcoming players, sort of like show them the sort of tournament play and the deck ideas and the strategies that are potentially available to them if they want to take the game up to the next level, but also create a fun viewing experience where players who are a little bit more casual can just sit back and watch the games, understand what's going on, and just have fun overall. And I think that that's something that the more competitive segment of the community kind of forgets, is that the competitive segment of most card games, that player base is actually a small segment compared to the players who play casually, people who play with their friends, and people who just like buy the cards to collect or to just like have fun with. So and you have to realize that as a part of that economics, this large proportion of the other players that are like the non-competitive players or the like non-hardcore competitive players, they purchase a lot of cards, and they create the economics that allows the game's developers, in this case Square Enix, to provide these larger tournaments and to back them up with prizes and to give rewards to more competitive players. And I think that's something that us more competitive players should take into consideration. And we definitely do appreciate very much the larger community in general for their contributions. And this allows us to sort of have the experiences of going on trips, winning prizes, and meeting people and having these great experiences that we may not have had by playing this card game. So I think definitely in terms of having a format where there's more deck diversity, the viewer experience is better, and people are just enjoying the event or the stream a little bit more. I think that that's not a huge setback, considering the prizes available to the players, and that only being available because there's this larger community that wants to purchase the cards and wants to view the stream. So I think that it's not a major setback or a cost to these players to adjust a little bit to have a better viewing experience. So the question is it a better viewing experience for the sort of more casual or sort of like more laid back sort of player, right? And I definitely think that this is the case. So considering how this is a best of 3 format, if you think about it, if it was just a single deck, like normal format, best of 3 format, you have each player playing, and potentially each game on the stream, you'll have at least 2 games where it's effectively the same matchup, right? So it'll be like first player and second player, they'll both have their first decks. They'll play each other in a game 1, then play each other in a game 2, and potentially play each other in a game 3, right? So for more competitive players, they can definitely unpack and sort of analyze and review each game more in depthly. And so, like, yeah, it is relevant to more competitive players. But for more casual players, that's effectively like what 50 to like potentially 90 minutes of just the same matchup played 3 times, right? And so that can be a little bit monotonous or can be a little bit boring for a more casual viewer. And I think the 2-deck format, actually, just by changing a very like minor thing, actually just makes it so that every best of 3 effectively becomes completely unique, right? So yeah, because you have 3 games and they're all playing with different decks. Both players will play with their like first deck, then they play with the second deck. So that's 2 different matchups there. And their third decks, the third game will be the decks that both players lost with. So that's a completely different matchup in itself, right? So even if 2 players play each other in Swiss and then play each other later in the top cup section of the tournament, you can have 3 or you can have 6 potentially very different matchups. So you can have in the first time they play, both players going deck A, deck B, and then like an A and B deck, right, for game 3. And then like the second time they play, maybe one player switches up the order, so it's an A deck versus B deck, B deck versus A deck, and then like A deck versus B deck or B deck versus A deck for the third game. So potentially you have all 6 combinations or permutations or matchups shown on stream because there are twice as many decks in the game. So that's a much more like sort of interesting viewing experience for a more casual player. They can see how more cards interact with each other, and we'll have more unique sort of interactions between the decks. And so from a viewing experience and from a commentator's experience, it gives a lot more to sort of like discuss and to talk about and to sort of like really understand about the game. And so I think from a optics perspective, it's a very good move. And considering that if you take the wider business considerations into account, then I think that it's a very fair consideration, considering that we have such a small player base compared to the larger games, and we can't necessarily focus our competitive tournaments on purely competitiveness. There is a degree of sort of viewership and a little degree of marketing that that Square Enix can justify, and I think that this isn't overly burdensome on the players, besides from organizing the second deck, in my opinion. Yeah, so in summary, yes, it is short notice, but like I definitely feel that players of this caliber will adapt and will be able to make their decks happen. Obviously, it does give benefits to players with certain strengths of being able to adapt quickly or to be able to think on their feet a little bit more in tournaments. So definitely, this is it does give certain players advantages, but I don't think that it is a format that prejudices particular regions or areas of players in particular. It's a pretty equal format for everyone in general, and I think definitely with players of this caliber, and considering that the format has been quite broken down and quite practiced, this is a good way to sort of shake the format up, even though it is pretty short notice. In regards to the non-uniformity of this format compared to other regions, definitely it does suck. That like Euro region probably had the most difficult set of qualifiers or set of qualifiers to qualify this tournament, and arguably they get the least rewarding prize of going to World Championships, in that their trip is a little bit close to home and they can sort of like get to England or UK a little bit easier. So yeah, so that does kind of suck, but definitely the game is growing and developing, and I definitely do have faith in the organized play team to sort of take upon the feedback and to learn from this year's system and have a much better uniform system going into next year. That's just my opinion, but seeing how they've improved from year 1 to year 2, and how they've taken all upon themselves to improve so far and sort of take upon our feedback, especially the community managers. While I haven't personally had a chat with Tim Schilder, people like Fabian, and people like the ANZ OP manager Tim, they've been really quite open, and they've been listening to players and sort of taking upon their feedback and using those to adjust and to improve the system. I definitely do feel that their heart's in the right place and they are trying. So I think that they're going to improve upon the system. It's not a terrible system this year. It is a little bit short notice, but definitely as this game like matures a little bit more into year 3, year 4, yeah, definitely this is going to be much more well-oiled and polished. And finally, the final consideration is just like the purely economic and logistical considerations of this isn't a super popular game, so we do need to consider the marketing and like growing the player base as a secondary consideration of these tournaments. And when you consider these additional factors, and how relevant or how important having a larger competitive tournament or a larger, more premier event can drive more players to the game, and how that overall is what we ultimately want to do, is to like build the community, get more players in, and to have a wider community to enjoy this game with. I don't think that is a greedy or a terrible like ulterior motive to go for, or a secondary objective to go for. And I think that this is a very fair contribution that the competitive players can make to sort of help boost that particular goal that Square Enix might have for the game. So I sort of want to finish off that I'm not really trying to suck up to Square Enix or organized play for this. I'm definitely one of those people that does speak the honest truth, and I will brutally cut down any business that I think like is acting greedily or acting selfishly or acting stupidly. But honestly, I think that this decision that they made is actually well justified. And whilst it does kind of suck for the people involved, especially for the short term, it is kind of one tournament, and I do know that a lot of people are riding on this tournament to get their qualification for the World Championship, so they are a little bit more anxious in regards to this last minute change. But I think that you guys are all very good players, and I think that this is quite manageable for you guys. And I think you guys will do well. Definitely best of luck to the people who are playing in this tournament. And I think that if you prepare well, I think you all have the capacity to do well and to prepare for this tournament. So definitely I know that people are stressed out about this, but I think you guys can do it at your level and ability. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Tune in again later this week as I go deep dive onto this format and really sort of like pick up how you can prepare your decks, or how you can deck select, and some of the interesting considerations that this format does bring to the tournament overall. So if you guys think I've missed anything, or there are any considerations that I haven't sort of really touched upon, or any sort of questions you want to pick my mind on, definitely do feel free to put your questions in the comment section below. I will get back to them. I do respond to them. And if otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Grand J out.